Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to take another look at using OMT to basically manage bandwidth on a connection into a system. And this can be especially important if you are bringing in multiple feeds across a gigabit network. And you may want to have different mechanisms available to you to cut down on the bandwidth requirements across that network port. So that's what we're going to dive into today. But before we get there, as always, I welcome everybody. If you have any questions, any comments that you want to get answered, just post them and we'll try to get to it here live on the show. And also, if you'd like to join us live, we have a link for you. It's down in the show notes. And if you click on that, somebody from the studio will get you on air with us. So let me dive in. And what I want to do is I want to take, I have this set up as a vMix session. I'm going to take the output of vMix and I'll give you a sense of what I'm talking about here. So if we look at this now, what I have is I have a camera coming in. This is just an NDI feed that's coming in. And then we're using, in this case, LiveToAirZ because we already support OMT in that. So it gave me an easy way to bring in multiple OMT sources. But we have 8 guests that are coming in now from a remote system. So typically for OMT, each guest would be somewhere around 80 to 85 megabits per second in here. So just that would be, almost 700 megabits of guest feed plus an NDI camera coming in at full resolution would be putting us, bumping that up even higher to, probably now about 800 to 900. So that would really be pushing the edge of what you could take in on a gigabit network. But what I have, and it's the reason I put these all up at the same time, and it may be a little hard to see, is all of these guest videos are actually thumbnails. So they're much lower resolution. You can see they're sort of fuzzier and a little softer. But what I set up was that if I wanted to, say we want to bring in guest 3, I could take and pop that guest on and put them into full resolution. And then when I want to pull them off again, it brings everybody back into this sort of reduced soft resolution. And the amazing thing is that soft resolution you're seeing now is only about 2 megabits per second, 2.5 megabits per second per guest. So significantly lower, significant savings on your network bandwidth. And I'm just going to do one more thing. If you want to look, I have my network throughput. And now in the studio, we have a lot more coming into my system here than just these feeds, but we can get a good sense of our baseline. So right now, with everybody sort of in low resolution, preview resolution, we're doing about 350 megabits per second coming in. If I turned all of these guests onto full resolution, so I just had that set up as a button here. So there you go. Now you can see that this has jumped up considerably, and I'm ramping up now with everything I have here to, somewhere between 850 and 900 megabits per second. So just sort of a good general view of how that makes a difference. And then when I shut that off again, you can see that now drops back down. So just with this setup that I have here, we are talking, that we're running somewhere, at a savings of, 500 to 600 megabits. So, definitely valuable network bandwidth if you needed it. But that's just to give you a demonstration of that. So before I get into how we're doing all this, we have some comments. So let's say hi to everybody and get started. So William, thank you. I appreciate you joining again. Always good to see you. Otis, howdy back from New Jersey. Good to see you again too. So, Wolfgang, thank you. Thank you for joining. Appreciate it. Michael, greetings back. Thanks for joining. Okay, so let's start by first looking at the way we have vMix set up over here, and I'll talk a little bit about the whole model that we're using here. So if we look at the vMix screen, I have 8 guests coming in here on my vMix system. These are all coming in as OMT feeds. And just to sort of remind everybody, let me sort of just go back and show this. If I wanted to go and bring somebody in and do something, I could go in and say, I want to see just my OMT feeds that are coming into the system. So this gives you a sense of how that we pull in OMT. It's very similar to the way you'd pull in NDI. It's just a new thing in vMix 29 for OMT. So all of these guests are coming in here, and I've created a composited view where I have the host and all of these guests. And then I have my second view, which is the host and just the solo guest that I want to feature here. It doesn't necessarily have to be this way for yourselves, but that gives you something that, gives you a reference. You could turn around and say, I may have 2 or 3 guests that I'm going to bring in at full bandwidth based on what I'm doing, but I want to be able to switch all those other guests to low bandwidth so the connection persists, but the bandwidth utilization goes down. So different ways to apply this, but this is just the demo example we're using here. So we have the 8 guests. I have a host camera coming in as just an NDI feed. And then what I did is to simplify things and to actually help with sort of doing some of the merges and whatever, I actually put whichever guest I want to solo into a separate mix. And I have those mixes now. So I have that mix put into one of these 2, or both of these actually, 2 composite inputs. So the composite input for the multi-guest shot, if I come in and look at the layers, I just have each of the guest shots coming in. I have the host camera, and then I have in slot 10 the solo mix, which is just the one guest that I want in full resolution. And what I'm doing is this solo mix, if we sort of edit its position, it slid all the way off onto the side of the screen. So it's not on the screen anymore. But when I want to go to the host plus 1 guest, which is sort of our beauty shot, so to speak, what I'm doing is I'm taking that solo mix and now I'm sliding it right over here. So you see it comes into this second position. And what I'm also doing for all my other guests, layers 1 to 8, is I'm actually playing around with the rotate. So as opposed to sort of moving them other places, all I'm doing is I'm taking those guests when they're on screen and I'm just rotating them up so they sort of disappear. So you get that sense where I see all this 8 guests on the side, and then each of those just sort of turn in. So you just see head on, the side on, which is invisible, and I slide the other guest over. And that's how we do this. So if you just, if I do this setup, and I'll just sort of pick a guest here. We'll pick guest 5, and we'll bring them solo. You can see all those turned up, and the guest slid in from the side. And then when I go back to look at all the guests, they all just rotate back. So that's basically what we have happening in vMix. Everything else is through shortcuts and scripting. So let me go through the shortcuts, because this is sort of sets the stage for how we do things. So if I look here, what I'm doing is I have a Stream Deck and I have 8 buttons that are set up for saying which guest do I want to solo, guest 1 to 8. And all I'm doing is setting dynamic value 1 with that number 1 to number 8. And I'll use that in scripting to decide, how to manipulate the inputs and the layers that I'm working with. I then have scripts for showing all of the guests, soloing the guest. I have an initialization script that just sort of sets everything up for the first time we run it. And then for demo purposes, I have this full-on script, which turns everybody's resolution to full resolution. And then I have other things. For instance, I have the ability to do swaps. So if I have a focus guest, one of my soloed guests, I could swap who goes in there. And I also can bring the host or the guest themselves full screen. So I just set these up. These are the host full and the guest full are all just, those are just shortcuts, direct shortcuts, merge. Everybody else is in the middle here is all scripts. And we'll go through those scripts next. So let's see. So yeah, just to show you, because I mentioned it, if I have this guest here and I wanted to select other guests, I could just, let's put guest 2 in there and I can just do swap. And we do this sort of fade through, guest 7 or 8, and we'll do swap. So same thing. So just the ability to do this and then go back to solo. But the key thing is when I do all this stuff, I am only having one single guest over here in full resolution. So when I'm doing all of these transitions, I'm pulling all the guests not on screen into preview mode, and everybody else is preview off that I want to show on screen. So let me see. I want to touch on, we have a few more comments, I think, and then from there we'll dig right into the scripting here. So RP Media, thank you for joining. Good to see you here. So, and Michael's saying, in the post show, could you reiterate on LiveToAirZ or LiveToAir? What bandwidth resolution can I get from my remote guest to your product to vMix in my studio? Okay, I will definitely jump in and do that as soon as we get to the post show. So thanks, Michael. So let's dig into the scripts. And to start, we'll look at what I have the initialization script. And that will give you a sense of how we're going to do some of this stuff. So like most things, you want to do some basic initialization when you use scripting. So I set up basically an index that I'm going to use, and that I'll use for a loop down here. And then I just initialize my dynamic value and set that to guest 1. And then I also set my dynamic input to the input of that first guest. So that just gives me multiple ways to sort of change things around. And then what I'm doing here with this loop in the initialization is I'm using a shortcut that was added in vMix 29 called OMT preview on. So there are these two new shortcuts. One is preview on and the other is preview off. When you switch an input to preview on, you are actually turning its resolution down to about, as I said, 2.5 megabits for a 1080 feed. So that means that I can drastically reduce the bandwidth required by that input feed. And I have preview off, which then puts it back to whatever the feed I requested. So if it's default, that will normally be what OMT considers their medium resolution, which can be 1080, but it's just in terms of bandwidth that gives you a quality. But typically that quality is fine for most things. They do have high, which goes up to about 130 per guest as opposed to 80. And they do have a low as well. So, there may be reasons you would mix that. Unfortunately, I can't change which of those like full resolution feeds I am getting. I can, when I negotiate initially, I can request a feed, but once that remote system sends me the feed, that's pretty much locked in, and there's no tool to change it. Now, clearly in code you could negotiate, but there's no direct tool to change that. But I do have the ability to switch between preview and whatever that full resolution feed bandwidth I set is coming in at. So that's what we do, and that's just taking and starting us with the sort of initial state that we want for all of this. Next is we have a script called focus on. And what focus on does is that's where I want to make that one guest solo. So I want to turn the focus to one of these 8 guests I have and put them side by side. So if we go through this, again, there's a little bit of a setup I do. I just make sure that I have my basically host plus 8 guests inside of my program, because then I'm going to be, switching over to my focus guest, and that's what I'm setting in preview. And so that's my host plus 8, which is the host plus 8 guest. And then my preview I set up as host plus 1, which sets that all up now. So all I have to do is merge across and everything would be good. So that's where we start. We get the input set in vMix, and that's good. Then we go in and we start to read the dynamic value that we have set. So dynamic value 1 is the guest that we want to bring live, sort of bring it to focus. So you, again, just set yourself up to read the vMix XML. And then what I'm doing here in sort of one swath of function here is I am pulling in the dynamic value 1, and I'm appending it to LTAZ because inside of vMix, my guest feeds coming in from LiveToAirZ were all coming in. They were all named LTAZ 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is just the prefix of my guest input, and this is the number. So that's sort of the index that I actually want of which guest I'm going to use. And so I set that as this is the input that I want to solo. And so I set that in. And then what I'm also doing is I'm taking, because if you remember, I set up in dynamic input 1, which is different. The dynamic value stores values, dynamic input names inputs. And that's how we work. So I'm just saying turn the preview mode on for the dynamic input. And what that's telling the system is take whatever the last guest that was soloed, whoever my main focus guest was previous to this, and put them into preview mode because I want to reduce the resolution there. And then I turn around and say, now set the dynamic input right over this to, this is going to be input solo. That's going to be my current one, whoever I'm making full visible now. So that's what's that giving me is the ability when I switch a guest out to turn their resolution down and to then set it to say, now this is the guest that's going to be high resolution. I'm not doing anything other than storing that. So the next time I come in to switch, I can make sure that that previous guest was turned to low res. So at that point, I've got this set up. And now what I'm doing is I am basically taking the mix. If you remember, I said I'm using the mix to handle the guests that I'm bringing full screen. And so I'm using mix2 here. And if you remember, when I specify mixes inside of vMix, those are 0-based, so to 0 reference. So when you specify mix equals 1, what that's actually saying is it's the second mix available in vMix because there's 0, which is my program. And then mix 1 is my second mix. So what I'm doing is now I'm saying cut whatever that solo input, cut that guest that I'm taking that live now, put them into mix 1 as, which is the second mix, put them into that. And then for that input, turn preview off, which is say now put them at full resolution. And I'll bring that in. And then all I'm doing is I sleep for 100 milliseconds to make sure everything has taken effect. And then I just do a merge over like 1.2 seconds. And that gives you that slow things turning up and the guests sliding in. So that's basically what I'm doing. And so the model we're using in all of this is just to turn around and make sure that we always just have one guest at most on full resolution, everybody else set to preview resolution, and then we just do merges between that. So if I want to take the focus off and go back to all the guests, I have another script for that. And let's see where are we at. Okay, so a lot of very similar things. We're going to use the solo input and do all that. So we're setting up everything for vMix to get all the data. We set up the input solo, just like we did in the previous section. And now, sort of running through this stuff, we are making sure that we have the soloed participant into program. And the preview input now is the host plus the 8 participants in preview mode. So this sort of getting everything set up in reverse to what we did the first time. And then I'm just doing the merge to bring on all 8 guests. And I'm turning around and turning the preview on for the guests that used to be soloed. And so again, this is just, I am making sure that that guest is put back to low res. And that means that when I switch to all 8, everybody should be set as low resolution. And similarly, I showed you I have the ability to swap between guests. So this is a pretty similar thing. I just, I have the host plus one, and I make sure that they're in my main input up here as my program out. I have the solo, who the guest is, and a lot of the same stuff, doing all the things we started with the vMix XML, setting up the input solo. And then all I'm doing is saying, let's turn the OMT preview off for the input solo. And then, which is basically putting it full resolution. Then I just go in here and I do a cross zoom to put that in mix, turn the OMT preview on for dynamic one, which is again the same as whoever's an input solo. And, that just, drops we turn the preview on for dynamic one, which is the previous guest that was an input solo. And so we drop that resolution for them. And then I just go and say, and now this is the new guest that's in, solo, that's being soloed. So I have that stored. So if I swap again, I can just shut that guest down and, not screw things up. So it's a fairly simple mechanism to do this. And there's lots of different ways that you can set this up. But the basic thing relies on those 2 new shortcuts in vMix for OMT preview on and OMT preview off, which control that. Okay, so let's see. We have a few more comments here that we can get to. So we have Guy. So isn't that, yes, Guy, so Guy's saying, isn't that how TriCaster works with NDI? You have low res preview that they kept for themselves. So essentially, yes, this is something that theoretically you're able to do if you have, if you write an app with the advanced SDK, but that has, licensing fees and a lot of other issues. And we sort of touched on this before. That was one of the reasons I think that OMT came into being, was just as a hedge in case NDI licensing became problematic for some software vendors. OMT became an optional way to do that. But yes, that is basically how this works. And, I just think that because you have this ability, you can sort of make this work for you. And having something like 8 guests, especially if you had them at even higher resolution, like 130 megabits per second, that would be something that would be very difficult for anybody if you didn't have a 10 gig connection and a fairly hefty PC around to process that much incoming data and do whatever sort of decode you needed on the other side. This would simplify some of that and reduce the network load and some of the processing load. So absolutely, it's very similar to how the TriCaster handles that. So, Bill, great. Thank you for joining. It is nice to see you here live. So I appreciate you making the time. All right. So that's everything I want to cover here. I know the last show, I didn't get all the assets up in a very timely manner, which I apologize for. This time I put them all up before the show. So everything, all the scripts and the vMix session preset should be there. So you should be able to access all of this. So why don't we wrap this up then, and we'll go to our post show. I know that Michael was asking about some things with LiveToAirZ, so I can talk a bit about that, and hopefully that would give us a jump point, and then we can get into whatever other questions you have. So if you can't join for the post show, I appreciate you joining here live, and we'll have another show. I'm pretty sure we'll be in 2 weeks I think it's the 21st. And so we'll definitely be getting to see each other by then. But if you can stay, that would be great. And we'll switch over there in a moment. But for those who will not join us for the post show, be safe, be well, and I'll see you in a bit. Hello, welcome to the post show. So let me switch over because I know we were asked about LiveToAirZ. So gonna just sort of bring this up and see if I can share a few things here. So I know Michael was asking, I believe specifically about bandwidth and resolutions and things like that. So let me just open the interface here, and I'll put this over on this screen, and hopefully we'll be able to sort of just show you a little bit of what Michael was asking there. So let's see if we can, let's switch over to my desk right screen here. So that's great. So this is LiveToAirZ. This is where you could join a meeting and you would see all the guests from a Zoom meeting here. I could then assign them to individual channels and take those as output feeds. So that's basically sort of the general model for this. But specifically about how we control the different resolution and bandwidth required. So in the OMT video and OMT audio, you can turn those on, but it works for both NDI and OMT here, as well as secondary. So you could send it out in HDMI or an SDI. So if you had like some Decklink cards that had, like the minis, which have HDMI out, and the quad and duos, which have SDI out, you could pick that as well. I don't have any installed on this, but that would give you that. I could then pick whichever resolution I want from all the different resolutions we support. So it's a pretty broad list of resolutions. And that would be really just the resolution side. When somebody then connects with us, so if that's over here, if I actually switch over, well, let me leave it inside of vMix. I can ask for the resolution that I want. So if I come here, maybe if we could switch over to the vMix interface, I could show. So if I come over here and just click on any of these, I can go back and say, what's the quality that I would like to suggest? So in LiveToAirZ, if somebody asks for this quality from OMT, we would respect that. We would just give them whatever quality they ask for. And default, we'll go in default and they go in default. It will be medium quality. But this is what you get. So low, medium, and high. So that will control the bandwidth. So I believe low is going to be somewhere around 40 megabits per second. Medium is 80. And high is about 130 for a 1080p signal coming in. So that gives you a rough idea. So you can control the resolution. So that's the first thing. And then you can also, inside of vMix, you can negotiate the quality of the signal, which will give you that sort of, full picture for how much bandwidth in aggregate this will take. Low at lower resolution at a lower bandwidth clearly takes less. So different ways to handle that. But as I said, none of this is controllable during the actual, after you make that connection. I would have to go up and sort of remake this connection up here where I could go in and change it and make that negotiation happen. But there's no way to do it through automation. So this would be something I just couldn't do in the background based on whoever was live or on screen. This would be something I had to manually go in and do for every guest as we were working with them. So, potentially workable if you wanted to do something that way, but really not an optimized workflow for this. So hopefully that made sense. If you have any other questions, just, pop them in during the, the post show here, and we'll get into that. But the interesting thing for this is I was thinking as I was sort of looking through interesting topics that I wanted to cover, and we haven't really talked a lot about the core differences in terms of not at a technical level, but at a usability level. I don't have, in this case, a TriCast I'm running. How can I manage my bandwidth? TriCaster does it sort of baked in automatically at a low level. This gives you, at a scripting level, a very similar capability. And I think that can be pretty useful. It also means that, if we're talking, 2, 3, 4 megabits per second, even for these preview images, theoretically, you could put a lot of guests up into a window at that low resolution. And I know there's a lot of people who like that look, where you get sort of, I tile all my guests that are watching on Zoom, and then I can pull one or two in and sort of talk to them and engage. But having that as sort of a set piece where I want to show something on a screen, you could actually take and, have a LiveToAirZ that's just constructing all of these individual guests, and that, isn't pulling huge amounts of bandwidth. And the other thing I didn't really mention, but inside of LiveToAirZ, I don't have a channel limitation. So I can just keep adding more channels, and as long as Zoom is giving me bandwidth to download those guests, that will work. So, it really becomes a question of what resolution do I ask for them at Zoom. So when I sort of negotiate into that, so I could potentially set very low resolutions in what I'm looking for just by virtue of having that many guests coming in. And then I could create these big composited sort of walls of guests look that a lot of people like. So different ways to leverage this low bandwidth mode, this preview mode, inside of vMix. And I think that's another really cool feature, that I do have access to that programmatically through scripting. And that gives me some cool things I can do. The other thing that, I was thinking about with this is really focusing in on some of the challenges that people using 1 megabit per second and are trying to work with network-based sources. That can be a real issue for people. And, you run into the edge of things. So some of it is getting your network dialed in correctly. And that's probably another good show at some point to do, to really dig into different network configurations and make, to optimize that. But it's also something, if you're just, you're not really a network guru, but you want to be able to maximize, what you can do. This is another way to handle that, to sit there and sort of reduce that network load where possible. So those are the two sort of drivers. How can I do something interesting and different through this using vMix? And then also, how do you really optimize your bandwidth? So Michael's saying, I know you've touched on this in previous shows. I still admire how you build a neat, clean, and dynamic graphics setup, like the 8 guests folding away when zooming in on one guest. Yeah, that's one of those things that I've always enjoyed. I always try to think of something different that people haven't seen, and that's something I hadn't seen, so I figured I'd show different ways to do that fold thing. And the cool thing is you can do this in different patterns and other ways to do that, as well as use masks and other things to do that. So, if you use a mask with an animated overlay, basically, an animated mask, you could actually sit there and do almost like origami style things and, kaleidoscopic looks to bring things on and off. So lots of cool ways you can work with things, and I was using Merge to do this, but you sort of can do the same things almost by merging the mask that you use to hide and show elements on screen. And that, one of the things, if you remember, I put the mix inside of a the optimal the solo guest inside of a mix. But that I can use a mix for other things. So I could use a mix basically to do my mask and put my mask as a mix, and then switch between different things that I want to set up, and using multiple inputs and layers and merges to make all this stuff move. So very cool things you can do with how you want to bring things on and off screen, or how you want to lay things out or cut them up into different segments on screen. So that's one of the, in my mind, the most compelling things about vMix as a tool. Even though you can look, and the TriCaster does some amazing things, and I definitely like the TriCaster. Just when you want to get fully creative and dig in and do things, vMix gives you that. You can open it, and that would be anything you imagine. You can, between scripting and masks and everything else you put together, you got a lot of options for all this stuff. So Michael's saying to do a show on how to build show graphics, at a high level. That's a very good idea. So I'll definitely get that into the list of things that we have that are potential shows, and this will be, that would, I think, be a really fun show to do. So thanks. I appreciate that, Michael. So, okay. So that's really it. I think, I hope you found this useful. I think it's gives you some things to consider in terms of how you can leverage OMT. So even if you are fully NDI in other aspects for cameras and other devices, computer to computer things. So if you had multiple vMix systems that are talking to each other, one handling one aspect of a production, the other handling another, that I think is something that gives you some really cool options using OMT, where you can reduce the bandwidth needed to connect between those, especially if you have a lot of NDI cameras coming in. So some of those, even at HX2 and HX3, like especially HX3, you're still taking 60 megabits per second on an HX3 feed. So that could suck up a lot of your available bandwidth inbound to your main switching computer, and so OMT could help you reduce some of that. So Ed is mentioning that. Hi Ed, thank you for joining and commenting here. He runs vMix as a source into the TriCaster, so they can do those types of graphic changes live. And we actually have multiple vMix systems here. Like everything that you're seeing with the comments is actually coming from another vMix station that Matt on the team here is running, and that's coming in as a pre-multiplied alpha that we just keep on screen, and he pulls things on and off. So when he puts up a comment, that's just a pre-multiplied alpha that's going on as an overlay. So lots of different ways to use vMix across systems, as well as things as inputs into the TriCaster. So you can get a lot of those benefits as well. And like I said, like the TriCaster, I just look at vMix as, if I need to get anything done that's sort of a little out there and crazy and different, vMix is a great place to start for that. All right, then, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. I really do appreciate it. Let me know in the comments if you are interested in more things about OMT in the future. I'm not looking to do something right away, but if OMT is still an interesting topic for you, just let me know, and tell me more specifically what you'd like to see in it, and we'll definitely cover that. Michael's suggestion about doing something on preparing show graphics and looking at that could be another fun thing to do, sort of let the creative side run a bit as opposed to the technical side. And then any other suggestions, always, of course, if you like for shows. We're always looking for new things. So like I said, thanks for joining, and hopefully, I have not tried the Raspberry. So Mike was asking if I tried the Raspberry Pi setup. That's not something I've set up yet. that would be an interesting show, and that would be something that would be cool to set up. Got to just get that in the show budget, but you know, to get a couple of the newer Raspberry Pis, but that could definitely be an interesting show as well. So, thanks, Michael. All right, everyone. So that's a wrap for this show. Thanks for staying. Thanks for staying for the post show, and until our next show, be safe, be well. I'll see you then. Take care.